Welcome to tonight's talk, which is opening up our St Benedict week. It's wonderful to see so many people here. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we're going to hear our first speaker on the theme, Benedict, Opportunity in a Time of Crisis. It is Jerome Beards, who is the Discipleship and Digital Coordinator for our community. Our goal and aim and hope in the lay community is to help to create a new generation of fans of St Benedict. And this week is all about creating a buzz and letting people know and letting the word spread about St Benedict. And that's why we put together this series of talks and blogs and podcasts. We invite you to meet up with each other. We invite you particularly to find a Benedictine community and to go and pray with them. And we also invite you, if you would like, to join us in the lay community in our daily online prayer. Last year, we managed to associate many different Benedictine communities, and this year we have some new ones, and we hope to continue adding to this as the years go by. Now, just a word about our speaker tonight, Jerome Beards, 23 years old. He comes from Torquay, from a large family. He studied psychology and English literature at St Mary's University, and after that, he went as chaplain to St Philip Howard School. We met him last year and immediately invited him to come to propose himself for this role, and he's been with us since last October. We're delighted that tonight he's going to talk on the theme of discovering rootedness. So Jerome, just before I pass over to you, let's just pray for the Lord to be with you as you give your talk. Father in heaven, we bless you and we thank you for this occasion. We ask you to be with Jerome, to guide him, to send your spirit, to inspire him, and to help pass on the wisdom of St. Benedict through his words. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Now, Jerome, over to you.
Thank you very much, Adam, for that introduction, and thank you for the chance to talk, to deliver a talk for St Benedict Week. And I'd also like to, again, thank you all for coming. So the title of my talk is Discovering Rootedness. I think when we're thinking about a time of crisis and how we seek opportunity in that time of crisis, the idea of staying rooted is something that I think is appealing, but can also seem difficult to pin down. How do we stay rooted? How do we stay strong when things are moving around us, or things seem chaotic, or it seems difficult to find our place? How do we stay rooted? How do we stay firm? I'm going to begin the talk with something that, to be quite honest, is probably a little bit of a cliche when you're talking about matters of faith, but I don't think there's anything wrong with cliches, really. And that's thinking about our journeys of faith. We all have a journey of faith, whether we are someone who was raised in faith or someone who came into faith at a later time in their life. We all have a journey. We all have ups and downs, and we all have a journey towards a point, an initial point, where we decided to make our faith our own and to bring God into our lives in a special way. Even if we were raised in the faith as children, there's a certain point at which we make the decision, this is what I want to believe in, this is what I want to choose. And often our journey of faith can say something about the character of our faith currently, because no one's journey of faith is the same as anyone else's. We all have our own individual, unique journey of faith, and often it will have a very unique character or flavor. So for some people, they've been inspired to come to faith through living it out. They might have done some retreats when they were young, or maybe carried out some kind of ministry, and that just practice of living the faith really helps them to realize the importance of it. Or it could be that someone in your life, or multiple people, or people who you may not have met but you've read about or heard about, have inspired you in the faith, and you've been inspired by their example, and that's led you to want to make the faith your own, to be a part of it. So different people have different approaches to faith and different things that have drawn them to it in the first place. And I think for me, I came to a more active faith through kind of I suppose what you would call an intellectual route, which I really don't like using the phrase intellectual, because it just sort of sounds like you're saying, oh, I'm very intelligent, but kind of that interest in the idea of it, the theory, the theology, philosophy, whatever you want to call it. I mean, I was raised in the faith. I grew up in a Catholic household. I was going to church every Sunday. We were praying in the house regularly. But of course, it was something that was a big part of my life, but could easily become the background. And I think it was when I was a teenager that I began to take a bit more of an interest in my faith. Ironically, largely from starting to question it. So I can think of myself being about age 15 and starting to think, is any of this true? How do I know it's true? Starting to question it. But then starting to gradually find answers to those questions. So a lot of there's kind of the famous old philosophers like Thomas Aquinas and people like that, but then also some people who are big on YouTube. I'm sure there's some fans of people like Bishop Robert Barron here. But whether it's them or whoever it is, C.S. Lewis, there's all sorts of people that, I became very interested in, and really got me interested in the faith in an intellectual way, right? So I'm interested in the theory and the ideas. Now, I did begin to, once I started to accept those ideas and think, yeah, I really do believe this, it did, I will say, move from an intellectual interest to a personal relationship. I did realize that I needed a relationship with Jesus. So I think that did happen. But that, I think, is not something that happens instantly. And in fact, I don't think it's a process that ever really ends in this life anyway. So that's largely something that I'm gonna talk about in this talk as well, is that movement from treating the faith as a theory to treating the faith as a personal relationship. There's a quote from Mother Teresa that really speaks to me, which is, "The journey from head to heart is one that takes a lifetime." So the journey from head to heart is one that takes a lifetime. So it's not a one-time thing, it's a continuous process. Now, I think it's not just me who's like this, whether you're more inclined to the theological side of the faith or the intellectual side of the faith or not. I think all of us have this temptation to see our faith, and possibly even life in general, as a set of ideas or theory. And when it comes to faith, you can kind of think, okay, this is what I believe, this is Christianity, these are the core tenets, and this is how it all fits together, and this is how it fits into my life, and this is how you carry it out. And it's all this kind of big network and this theory, and it all knits together nicely, and you can get on with your life because you have this perfectly built framework, because you're just so smart. And I think there is kind of an element of truth to that, and I can also understand at the same time why it's tempting to fall into that. Not only because theology is very interesting, but also we need it. We need ideas and theories. We need, to think about our faith in that way. Sometimes we need it to make sense to us. I mean, for one thing, theologians will be out of a job if we didn't have theology. And there's also the kind of reactionary side to it, I think. So I think for me, growing up in the 21st century, I was surrounded by a world where you had things like the new atheist movement. So sort of figures like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and people like that who, were very much espousing this idea that faith is completely irrational and also kind of anti-rational, that it's against the idea of reason. You've just got to have faith. There's no rational side to it. So I think there's a good instinct there in wanting to kind of push back the other way and say, no, we are rational, and I can come up with all these different arguments, and I know all these things, and that sort of thing. And it's helpful to have a framework. But the thing about treating the faith as a theory or as an idea is that eventually it just becomes one theory among many. I don't know if you're how familiar you are with the idea of postmodernism, but that's a philosophy that came up in the 20th century. And one thing about postmodernism is that it's very suspicious of what it calls meta-narratives, which is this idea that there are all these different ways of viewing the world. So there's a Marxist view of the world. There's an ecological view of the world where everything's about the environment and the planet. There's a kind of psychological, psychoanalytic view of the world where you just believe in what Sigmund Freud says. There's a Christian view of the world, and that's just another view of the world. And you have all these views of the world and all these people saying, oh, I have this view of the world and my view is correct. And so eventually the correct thing is just to say, well, none of them are correct. That's the postmodern approach. So it's very easy to fall into that, I think, when you're just viewing the faith as a set of ideas. This is a theory. This is my theory of how the world works. And that's it. I think it might be why atheism only really, historically, kind of only really appears about 400 years ago. You had it maybe before the time of Christianity, but since then it kind of starts in about the 1600s and 1700s. And that can seem odd because actually people were questioning the faith before that. If you look at Aquinas and Augustine and all these people, people were questioning the faith from the very beginning and thinking about how it works, and they weren't just believing it for no reason or refusing to ask questions. But I think it's when we get to that kind of era of the Enlightenment and so on that we begin to view reason as the main thing rather than faith or God as the main thing. So reason almost becomes a God, and everything has to be in service to that. So you're constantly trying to make everything you believe in service of reason, rather than reason being important, but it really only serving another purpose, which is God, which is faith. So otherwise you get this kind of situation where you get a kind of hyper intellectualism. And I think that's what I'm really talking about, rather than being reasonable at all, which of course is good. We use reason and logic all the time, but a kind of rationalism or hyper intellectualism where you say everything all comes down to reason, intellect, what makes sense. That's all it's all about. And this kind of hyper intellectualism and this kind of I need to figure everything out and have everything be very logical and make sense, I think causes other problems in people's personal lives as well. So for me, I've for several years struggled with scrupulosity. Now, some people might be aware of what scrupulosity is. So scrupulosity is a kind of tendency, often among people who are religious, to overly worry about moral and spiritual things and worry about getting them right. It often involves kind of excessive guilt or shame. It's similar, but distinct from, it's similar to the mental disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, so OCD. So that, this kind of some people have issues with, they feel they have to do everything right, and they repeat things and things like that. So that's, if people have a mental illness like OCD, that's how that plays out. Scrupulosity it can be related to OCD, but it's a separate thing. But still, it has a similar character of, you're excessively worried about. So it might be with prayer. You're excessively worried about having done your prayers right. If I don't do my prayers right, everything's going to go wrong. You're excessively worried about thinking bad things. If you're in a church where you have the sacrament of confession, where you confess your sins to a priest, then you might worry about having done that right, having said everything you need to say in the right way, the right, with the right amount of contrition or guilt or whatever. And if you don't do it, then everything's going to go wrong. And I think the thing about scrupulosity is, a lot of people can kind of misunderstand it, because scrupulosity, so a lot of people, if you're not scrupulous and you're kind of looking at this from the outside, you might talk to a scrupulous person, and this is a very well-meaning thing, but you might kind of think, okay, so the scrupulous person, they struggle with these things, they have all these thoughts telling them, oh, I need to make the sign of the cross 50 times, or I need to, kneel in this particular way, or I haven't done my prayers right, or something like that, or I have to focus on every word. They have all those thoughts telling them that, but they know it's not rational, right? So they know it's not reasonable, but it's just bugging at them, so they give in anyway, but they know it's not reasonable. So sometimes that can be the case, and I think sometimes if you're someone who's maybe dealt with scrupulosity and you're at a point where it's maybe more under control in your life, it might be a bit like that. But for a lot of people, actually, scrupulosity isn't really like that. It's not so much this kind of irrational thing of these thoughts are all here, but you know they're not real or reasonable. It's that actually it's kind of hyper rational. It's that you do believe all those thoughts, and it's because it's not that you're irrational. It's that you're kind of overly rational. So if you were to talk to a scrupulous person and you were to argue with them effectively about these things, you say, oh, you don't need to make the sign of the cross. That means, or you don't need to focus on those words of the prayer, because this is, you give an argument, then they give an argument back. You might actually find at some point, that you're losing the argument. Because for a lot of scrupulous people who struggle with this thing, they would feel like, well, yeah, if you can prove to me that I don't need to pray in this particular way, or I have done the confession right, or I've done this, and if you can prove that to me 100%, then sure, fine, I won't be scrupulous about that thing anymore. But the thing is, you can't. You can't prove to someone that, they've done their prayers in exactly the right way. You can't prove to them that they're completely forgiven by God. You can't prove any of those things. So you need to move beyond this kind of hyper rationalism. You need to approach things in a different way, and you need to encourage them to. So this is where the tricky bit is. And for me, in my challenges with scrupulosity, things have got better over the years, and there have been pieces of advice that have helped, definitely. But for me, really, I think the thing that helped the most was quite a recent experience. And that was when I went on pilgrimage to Medjugorje. So Medjugorje, some people might be aware of Medjugorje. It's a Catholic pilgrimage site in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and it's where the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, is believed to have appeared in the 1980s to a group of teenagers multiple times, and supposedly they're still having visions of her. So it's this very big pilgrimage site. People come there from all over the world. Now, you might be thinking, okay, this sounds like a very sort of Catholic thing, and I'm not Catholic, so I might not listen to this part at all. Well, it's fine because a lot of Catholics don't really like Medjugorje either. It's the thing about Medjugorje, it's not officially approved by the church, but it's not denounced by the Catholic Church or anything. It's just something where they've said, okay, we're not entirely sure if this is if this actually happened, but you know, it seems it seems to have fruits and people seem to benefit from it. And I can certainly see that I certainly saw that in my family, people have benefited from it. I have a cousin who received his call to priesthood when he was out there, heard God calling him to become a priest in the Catholic Church. So I decided to go. I didn't expect anything miraculous to happen, and nothing miraculous did happen. But there was a priest there by the name of Father Leon. He's a Dominican priest. He's the chaplain to the English-speaking pilgrims. And on the first mass there, he gave a talk which was titled, "How do you view God?" How do you view God? Now, at this point in the talk, it probably sounds like I was blown away by that. And I absolutely wasn't when I first heard it. Because again, it was just another idea. And I'd heard it before. Is, you know, there's this thing of kind of, oh, you know, I've heard all this before. It's the same ideas, you know, and the same old thing. And this was just like another little piece of the theory. Oh, yeah, you've got to think about how you view God, and you've got to work that in, and your image of God. So at first, it didn't impact me or blow me away, but I did start to notice over the next few days that my view of God, my perception of God, was starting to change. I think it probably started just before I went to Medjugorje, when I made the decision to go to Medjugorje. So as I say, Medjugorje is not officially approved by the church. It's not rejected by the church. The church just kind of says, we don't know at this point. It may be approved in the future. We don't know. But I felt tempted to, at first, to have this kind of overly rationalistic thing of, I've got to figure this out, right? So Medjugorje, I've got to figure out, I've got to do research, and I've got to figure out, is it true? Is it, you know, is it all a deception from the devil? And is it, you know, is it all telling us the wrong things? And, you know, and we're all, you know, we're all doomed. So I thought, oh, I've got to figure this out. But instead, I decided, okay, I can't see a serious issue with Medjugorje, so I'm just going to go. Now, if I did see a serious issue with it, I think I wouldn't have gone, and I'd say that's probably a good piece of advice. If you can see a serious issue with something, like if you think Jesus is appearing in Milton Keynes and saying weird things about, I don't know, punching people in the face or something, just don't go there. Please restrain yourself, okay? Don't do anything that seems really wrong. But if something is okay, you know, this seems about right, and I think it's fine, I'm gonna go and see what happens. Well, that's what I did. That's the decision that I made. And so I start to realize as I went there and I was thinking about my view of God, I realized that that question of how do you view God, which I maybe before had thought, oh, that's, you know, whatever, I've answered that before, I realized I hadn't answered it because there isn't a simple answer to the question. There isn't a logical connecting point. There isn't just there isn't another thing that, oh yeah, it's in that book there. That's how you view God, that sentence. It's not like that. Now, I won't talk much more about Medjugorje. It was very nice, very hot, there were lots of hills. Apparently Jim Caviezel from The Passion of the Christ was there at Mass when I was there, but I didn't spot him, so that's really annoying. But anyway, I think what's more important is what happened internally. So I began to see God as, or rather, I began to see God's love as the soil from which my faith had grown up until that point and from which it would grow, rather than the other way around. I think before I'd started to feel like I needed to reach God through my reason. But actually, it's the other way around, that God's love was here all along, and I could sense that in Medjugorje, but that I needed to switch the order and put God first. I think this is what St Benedict is getting at when he begins his rule talking about obedience. If you read the beginning of the rule, the prologue, he talks about the importance of obedience, obeying the voice of a loving father, turning away from the sloth of disobedience. He does start with, you've got to listen to the instructions of the loving father. So you've got to start with some rules and some ideas, some basic principles. That's important. We all need that in our faith. We need to know what we're talking about. But he moves to obedience, and he uses the phrase turning the ear of the heart. Not the ear of the mind, and certainly not the mouth of the mind that's going to tell God, oh, I know what you're like, and this is what I think. The ear of the heart. And what is obedience? I think obedience is trust in action. Knowing, accepting, and trusting in God. This is what I think Benedict talks about when he says the weapons of obedience is this trust. Trust is accepting someone's will unquestioningly and carrying it out. And it's not because you're stupid or you're irrational or you don't care about reason or you don't think it's important. It's because you trust the person that is giving you that message, that is speaking to you. So I entitled the talk Discovering Rootedness, and I began to think of that theme, rootedness, when I was doing these podcast interviews. The interviews that you'll see coming out during the week, there's one from Father Chad that's out already. And that theme of rootedness just seemed to come up in different forms throughout the whole thing. This idea of finding something that you can root yourself in. When we're in a time of crisis, when things are so chaotic and there's so much going on, and there's things we feel like we need to think about over and over again, and we need to figure everything out. We need to think about who to vote for, or how to plan for the future, or how to look after ourselves and look after our families, and we need to have all the answers. It's staying rooted in that soil, in that love of God. And that's what Benedict does. He roots himself in the voice of a loving father. He moves on to talk about prayer. That's how we do it. We root ourselves in God. Every day we start with prayer. We root ourselves in God. So I find this language of rootedness really comforting. And I think it's also that idea of staying rooted that allows us to accept the challenges in our lives. And you can even see it in Christ himself, in Jesus, staying rooted in the love of the Father. Before Jesus enters into his passion in the Gospel of John, he prays this long prayer to the Father. And he says to the Father that he knows that eternal life is to know and love God. To know and love God, the Father, and Jesus Christ, whom he sent. So that's what we're rooted in, the knowledge of God. Not knowledge about him, knowledge of him. And this is how we let our faith grow. So in our community, there's all sorts of things we talk about doing. There's all sorts of things we talk about getting done. We talk about the 3 promises we make as we become promised members: holy service, living holy service, offering service to others; holy space, creating space for God; holy communion, not just with God, but with other people in our community and beyond. But where do these come from? How do these start? They all start with God's love. Holy service is not doing things for others so that eventually you'll get to God or you'll figure out who he is or what he is. It's doing good for others out of that love from God that you have received and that is working through you. Holy space is discovering the love of God that is already there, just through opening up the space to him, to let him work, rather than sitting there and trying to reach him yourself. And Holy Communion, again, we use this word communion. So not just community. Think about the words. Community has unity, which is good. But communion is not just unity of a set of beliefs or thoughts or opinions. It's important what we believe. It's important to have good thoughts. It's important to have opinions that are well-founded, that make sense. But union is about knowledge. You come to know another person. You come to know God. I think of the prayer of spiritual communion that we use in the Catholic Church, written by Alphonsus Liguori, someone who was probably the best person in the history of the church when it came to dealing with the ideas of scrupulosity and helping people with scrupulosity. That's what I mean. And in that prayer, he says, he encourages us to say, I unite myself wholly to you. I unite myself wholly to you. So don't take a step back and think, okay, here's me and the theory and God, cut out the middleman. It's you and God. It's that knowledge and that acceptance and that trust and that faith. We root ourselves in the love of God and of Jesus Christ, and everything else flows from it. Thank you very much.